brake fluid changes seem to be one of the most often overlooked jobs on any car, so go and check your service history. Hello and welcome back to the channel, and welcome to episode 4 of the video series Road to the Ring, which covers the preparation of both the car and the driver in advance of taking my MK7 Golf GTI Club Sport S back to its spiritual home, the Nürburgring's fearsome Nordschleife. If you want to catch up on past episodes, there is a link to the Road to the Ring playlist in the description of this video below. Now in episode 3 I said there were 2 jobs I needed to do urgently on this car before it goes on track here in the UK very soon. The first was an oil change, which we did in episode 3. Today in episode 4 we're going to perform a brake fluid change. Now this is really important on any car, but it's super important if you're going to take a car on track, because the fresher the fluid, the less likely it is to be affected by the extreme heat that's produced when you brake from high speeds. And yet weirdly, brake fluid changes seem to be one of the most often overlooked jobs on any car, so go and check your service history, see if you've had one performed in the last couple of years, and if not, stay tuned and I'll show you exactly how to do it. Okay, let's start off then by talking about what you need to perform a brake fluid change on your car. We'll start from right to left because that way I won't forget stuff. So, any guesses why you need a watering can? This is actually probably one of the most important things. It's because brake fluid is really corrosive. If you spill it anywhere, particularly on your car's paintwork or on a wheel or even on the floor, on a tyre, you must wash it off with just normal water because this neutralises the corrosive effect of it. So make sure you've got something handy with water in it. You need a trolley jack because you're going to have to raise the car up. And I don't mention this very often, but it's a little puck that goes in the trolley jack with the slot into it that minimises the damage to your sills from jacking a car up. Really useful. Should have mentioned that before. You need a means of taking out the wheel bolts. I'm using this impact gun with a 17mm socket. You need some new brake fluid. This is Comma .4 ESP synthetic. It's probably what the car left the factory with. Pretty much, it's nothing special. I know there are super trick track brake fluids out there, and I will use them in the future, but I just want to see how well normal brake fluid works when it's fresh on track. So if it doesn't work, we'll upgrade at a later date. You need some means of undoing the bleed nipples. Now that's a brake spanner, and it goes pretty much all the way around the bleed nipple. It's 11mm, which should be all of them on this car. It does minimise the risk of rounding them off, but it doesn't guarantee it. So I prefer to start off the undoing process and finish them off when I tighten them with a socket. You can use a normal spanner, but it's not ideal for these, and rounding one off can mean big headaches. Now the most important tool is this brake and clutch bleeding system from Sealy, model number VS820.V4. I've had it for 10 years. Before this, I used to use an easy bleed, which you put the spare wheel onto the engine and use the pressure from that to push the fluid through. It's okay, but it's a fiddle with the wheel, and it's much easier to make a mess. So I bought this. It's only a bit more than an easy bleed, and it's been brilliant. Probably one of my favourite tools. I know people in the trade who do brake fluid changes with a helper in the car, and they don't seem to have had any problems, but I have heard stories about the seals in the master cylinder becoming damaged because suddenly the pedal's going all the way to the floor when you're doing a brake fluid change. It's normally only used to travelling up to about a third to a half of its travel. So I can't recommend you do a brake fluid change with a helper, but if you want to give it a go, give it a go. And you need a bottle that's fallen on the floor to capture the old fluid. Now on this car, you need to extract a litre from the brakes and another 150ml from the clutch side of things. This is a 500ml bottle, so it's pretty useless. I'd have at least a litre if I were you. Now this is the official brake fluid changing process from VW, and the most important thing in here is to tell you which order you bleed in. There's a specific order which means you get the most fluid out of the car with using as little new fluid as possible. So, enough chat, let's get down to the brake fluid change. Now before we start pressurising the braking system and jacking the car up, I suggest you go around each wheel and make it as easy as possible to take the wheel off when the time comes and you're about to bleed that corner. So if you've got wheel nut caps like the ones I've just fitted to these black Racing Line R360 wheels, what do you think? With the silver nuts, you do need to really cover them up on this black wheel. And this pack of 20 with a removal tool was only, I think, about £3 on eBay. So I'll put a link to this eBay seller in the description of this video. With the nut caps off, go and find your locking wheel bolt key if you've got a locking wheel bolt, and I suggest you take that out completely now. Just leave it with 4 bolts, and then just make sure those 4 bolts haven't been over tightened. Just give them an 1/8 of a turn with your wrench, and that means when you're under pressure doing the bleeding process, you know that the wheel will come off really easily. Right, now it's time to get the braking system pressurized. Okay, so now the fun bit, connecting the pressure bleeder to the master cylinder. First thing you need to do, undo the cap on the master cylinder, put that somewhere safe. And in the official Volkswagen guide, it says you should extract any fluid from the master cylinder that's above the gauze, the sort of filter in the cap, but there isn't actually a lot in there, so you don't have to do it anyway. It just means you push more fluid through to bleed the system. But because this car's brake pads have worn a bit since it was new, the fluid is pretty much on that anyway. So we will attach the bleeder adapter, I guess you could say. Now this might vary from car to car, so you need to make sure if you buy one of these, you get the correct one for your car. I don't know if they've standardized them in recent years. And just screw that on tight. It doesn't have to be crazy tight. Now this bleeder is good for 28 PSI, and in the factory guide it says you need to use about 28 PSI, if not more. But I think that's for bleeding an empty system that's been emptied before. This is just a fluid change, so I've never had any problems using 10 PSI. That means you're less likely to have problems with your bleeder, you're less likely to cause the master cylinder to explode, which does happen on some of the older cars. I think Audi B5, especially on right-hand drive cars, because this is often a much hotter part of the engine than left-hand drive. Over time, the master cylinder body gets hot and it becomes a bit fragile. It doesn't like being pressurized. So stick with 10 PSI and you should be fine. So with that connected, we should then be able to see the gauge on here go up as we use the plunger. Yep, it's going up. It doesn't take a lot of effort, this, at all. Okay, that's done. It's a good idea to try and keep this as vertical as possible, because if it tips, you might end up sucking air, especially as you get towards the end of the process. That's on 10 PSI. Have a listen for leaks. I can't hear any, so that's good. And now it's time to start getting the wheels off and begin the bleeding process. Now on this caliper, the bleed nipple is quite hard to see. It's all the way on the inside here. Sometimes they're higher up and more visible, but it's still quite easy to work on. You could turn the steering and bring the caliper out, but I don't think there's any need to do that. And it's quite tricky when the car's on the floor and you've got dirty hands to do that. So I just leave it as it is. You just need to pull the rubber dust cap off. Don't lose that. And you're ready to start cranking the nipple open. I should point out, this car's not had any brake fluid changes that I've seen in its service history. It's 6 years old. They should have been done at 3 years, then every 2 years after that. So there's a high possibility that the nipples will be seized into the calipers. And I've experienced that very recently on my Porsche Boxster, which has 2 nipples per caliper. Luckily, it's just 1 on this car. So fingers crossed that one of these 4 doesn't shear off. Okay, with that in mind, I'm just going to loosen it off with the socket. There's enough room to get that on. And I know from the Porsche that they can feel like they're coming loose, but you're just about to break them off. So now that's moving, so that's a good sign. Okay, so with that loose, we can now put the drain tube on. Just put the spanner on first, I think. Put that on. I've got this handy piece of wood. As I said, you can definitely have a better bottle than this one. And according to the Volkswagen technical guide, you need to get 200 mil out of each of the fronts and 300 out the back. So let's get started. Okay, it's coming through nicely. Okay, I'd say we're at 200 mil now, so time to tighten up the nipple. Okay, now it's really important to be careful when you're undoing the pipe, because that's the easiest time to spill brake fluid. So try and keep it upright. And yeah, that was a good bleed. And you can see that is pretty murky. I can't really show you the colour of the clean stuff because it's in a grey bottle, but trust me, it isn't as murky as that. Okay, time to nip the bleed nipple up. Like so. Actually, I don't really need to use this because the bleed nipple is still in good condition, surprisingly. Put the dust cap back on. It's a good idea every so often to just check the pressure in here is around 10 psi, because the more fluid comes out, the lower the pressure. So we're already on to about 5, so we just need to top that up. Okay, at the back it's slightly different, but the nipple is here and it's a little bit more visible. So just pull the cap off. Let's just see how tight it is. Nope, that's good. Okay, let's get the tube on with the spanner. So what is a bit awkward here is that it's very hard to get the spanner in. Interesting. Yeah, I think that's probably the best angle. And here she comes, so 300 mil out of this back one. Okay, so that's looking like pretty much 300 mil in that 500 mil bottle. So let's nip it up. Okay, that's good. Cap on. Because I've not done this before, I've logged on to the Volkswagen database Irwin. I've paid about 10 euros for an hour's access, and I've downloaded the official process for bleeding the clutch slave cylinder. It's a bit ambiguous because it doesn't specifically say you have to connect the pressure bleeder, but at the end of it says disconnect the pressure bleeder, so I presume it just carries on from the brake fluid change. It says vehicles with manual gearbox, remove air filter, which is a real pain because it's the R600, which I've only recently fitted, and then do this and that. So let's give it a go then. So first thing, we need to get the R600 off. If you want to see how to take the normal airbox off, then have a look at the R600 installation video. And there is the clutch bleed nipple. So let's pull the cap off it. So this is a special brake nipple spanner that goes completely around it. Okay, let's see how easy this cracks. That seems to be turning. Okay, that's coming out pretty fast. So I think we've done the 100 already. Just close that. Yep. And that, by the way, was a 9mm spanner. Okay, now it says close bleed valve, quickly press and release pedal from stop to stop 10 to 15 times. So let's go in the car, make sure my hands are clean of any brake fluid. Six, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 for good measure. Okay, next up it says open the bleeder valve and allow another 50mm to flow out. Easy enough. And yep, bottle's nearly full, so when it's full, I think job done. Okay, now to disconnect the bleeder, the pressure bleeder, and there is a special way of doing that. Now the problem with pressure bleeders is that they fill your master cylinder reservoir right to the top with brake fluid, which means it's above the max mark, and so you put some new brake pads in, all that fluid will just come out. So you need a way to lower that level, and the way to do it is to tilt the pressure bleeder onto its side so that the pickup hose is only going to pick up air. Stay with me, and release the bleed nipple. I'm just using this one because it's the most convenient. Generally you don't do the clutch one if you're doing an automatic, and you do this on the last brake nipple that you're working on. But I've had to take this wheel off again just to do this job properly, which is fair enough, it's not too hard. We've still got 10 psi on there. So let's release this nipple. Okay, we have got some flow, which is good. And now you can watch the pickup hose pump air into your master cylinder and just watch the level go down. Obviously you don't want it to go too far, but when it gets to the max mark, which we're pretty close to now, just nip the nipple up. And you should now have the perfect level. To check it, you need to make sure you depressurize the bleeder. Very important. I didn't once, and I'll probably never forget that. And then disconnect it from the reservoir. Just be aware of fluid and residual pressure. Okay. And just beware of drips of brake fluid on your lovely paintwork. And that's it, job done. So put the cap back on, put your wheels back on, make sure you torque your wheel bolts, give the brakes a test before you go on the public road or pick up any speed. Just make sure you have got a pedal. It's impossible really to mess this up, but just check that you haven't. And then obviously check your clutch as well, that's really important. Put your airbox back on, which is even more important. And then I think we're okay to go for a test drive. Well guys, I'm going to practice what I preach and test the car out on the driveway here. So the brake pedal feels good, brake pedal feels pretty normal, but they'd never feel that normal until you start the engine. So let's do that. Let's select reverse, and yeah, feels good. And we've got, yeah, feels like a pretty decent pedal. It's not going down when you press it, which is good, because if it does, it could mean that fluid's escaping from your nipples. Okay, let's get onto the road proper and give it a proper test. Okay, so we're doing 50 miles an hour, and I'm just going to give it a moderate application of the brakes, and that's pretty good. And then when the road straightens out in a sec, we'll go a little bit harder. That's good. And then now full braking, which is pretty good. So there's no issue with the pedal there. Even under ABS activation, the pedal was rock solid. So yeah, job done. The big question is, will these brakes actually survive some fast laps at Bedford Autodrome? Well, it's actually 6 days, almost to the minute, before I'm going to find out. So I'll see you for episode 5 of Road to the Ring. It should be a good one. As ever guys, thanks for watching this Volks Wizard video. I'm distracted by a Ferrari 308, and keep subscribing, keep commenting, and I'll see you for the next one very soon.